my story continues. I continue my story, and I'm living with my grandmother as a toddler, and always, all kinds of people always come in to pick me up, and I never know who it is or why. And an older lady came to pick me up, and I kind of got this bad vibe from her. I did not want to go with her. I didn't know who she was. I didn't understand it. I was kind of crying and not wanting to go, but they were like, you need to go. And I was kind of used to that by now. I always have to go with people that I don't want to go with. This was my grandmother. This was my maternal grandmother, my mother's mother. And I guess she just wanted to have some time with me to get to know me. And she brought me to her house, which was a big, nice house. And I remember being like, whoa. And she had a pantry with like all kinds of soups. And I remember thinking, wow, these soups are so amazing. Because I loved soups. I don't know why, but I did. I loved soups. And I was amazed by the pantry. And I remember thinking, whenever I grow up, I want a pantry like this. Because, I mean, it was a whole wall of like, it was like a grocery store shelf of soups. They had them, in the thing, and you could pull one out and the next would fall down. And I remember being amazed by that. And they had little wooden puzzles, and those were fun. And then she cooked dinner, and it was a good dinner. It was like steak, mashed potatoes, broccoli, and, all the fixins. It was a really good dinner. But my little child self, I didn't like dinners like that. And at my other grandma's house, my paternal grandmother who I was living with, if I said, I don't like that, then she would say, okay, go get you a soup, and I would go get me a soup. And so I'd already seen these soups. And so I was already like, am I going to have broccoli soup for dinner, or should I do cream of mushroom? Because those were my two favorites. And my grandma was like, no, you're going to eat this dinner. And I broke down. I was like 3, 4 years old, and I broke down, and I got on the floor kicking and screaming and crying right by her feet. And my grandpa snatched me up and gave me a beating of a lifetime. He beat my booty, and but he set me down at the dinner table, and they ate dinner very huffy and puffy like. It was very strange. And then after dinner, my grandma gathered up the stuff, and I just kind of ate, and it felt really weird. And my grandma finished up, and she took me outside. I don't know why, but outside there was this gazebo area, and she took me to this gazebo area and basically stripped me down and was showing my booty area to my grandpa. Apparently there had been a bunch of marks all over me, and my grandma was like, how are we going to tell this to Julie? And I don't think Julie is ever going to let her come back here again, and look what you've done. And just kind of getting on to him for beating me. And he took off. He left. And I was just like, okay, and went back to being a kid and playing. And then I remember there was a knock on the door, and it was cops. And the cops said something to my grandmother, and she broke down. She broke down crying, and I was kind of confused about that. And the cops sat down and just talked to me, and I played with them in the living room. I just kind of jumped around on the couch and played with them and had fun. I was just a little kid. And my mom came and picked me up, and we went to her grandmother's house, and they were looking at pictures and stuff, and I realized my grandfather had died. Then there was a funeral, and this is the first time that the first time I remember meeting my cousins. My cousin, I had a male cousin who's a year older than me, and at the funeral, I remember we were jumping from gravestone to gravestone. And then I remember everybody gathered and how boring it was. And my little cousin was crying the whole time. She was a baby, but she was crying. I remember thinking, get that baby, I don't know why. And then I went back to my grandmother's house, and that night she was tucking me into bed, and I saw my grandfather. He wasn't at the end of my bed, he was at the end of my bedroom, like right by the door. And he just stood there and looked at me, and then he turned and he walked, like the door's on this side and he was standing here, and like my bed's right here, okay, and here's the door, and he turns and he walks this way, which is into the wall, and he just walks through the wall and leaves. He didn't say nothing to me, he just stood there. And my little child mind, the way that I processed all of this was really, that was the first time I met my grandmother and my grandfather that I can remember. Like, they might have seen me as a baby, but I didn't remember that. This was like the first time that I'm interacting with them as a person. And so my grandfather hung himself. He killed himself. I don't think I quite understood that, but from then on, every time I see my grandmother, I felt like, oh, she knows that I'm the reason he died. You know, like, I don't know. I just had this feeling of my maternal grandmother. I was like, she knows that I'm the reason, I'm why he died. And so I never was able to get close to her. I kind of avoided her as much as I could. But yeah, whenever I saw my grandfather there, and the fact that he just stood there and then turned and walked off, I was like, I knew he was dead. So I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna die. and it kind of scared me. And I remembered before dying and being with Jesus and just telling my grandparents bye, or I don't know, I thought I died, dreaming of dying, I guess. But so I get up and I decided that, I want to tell my grandma and my grandpa bye. And so I go to my grandma, and she was working in the bathroom, I think, doing laundry. And I told her, I said, I think I'm going to die. And she was just like, yeah, baby girl, we're all going to die one day. Whenever it's our turn, we'll die. And that's okay. You'll die whenever it's your turn and not a day sooner. Now go back to bed. And I was just like, okay. So I was just like, well, okay. So I just went back to bed, and yeah, I felt like, I don't know, I was worried that I was going to die in my sleep. And I said my prayers, and whenever I woke up in the next morning, I felt so good. I was like, I conquered death. My little kid mind. It's like I conquered death. But that was my first experience with a ghost. And after that, I've seen ghosts right after they die. But after they die, I don't see them anymore. But they'll communicate with me. And I'm not always sure that they're communicating with me, or I wasn't growing up. But I don't always see them, but I can sense them. And that was my first experience with the ghost. And I'm absolutely certain that it was my grandfather, because later on, there's been times that I've talked to this spirit, and it tells me that I was a part of his life review. And so I don't know. I feel like it was my grandfather, and he was checking on me one last time or something. I don't know. I can't explain it. But, yeah. So that was my first experience with ghosts and stuff, and, what I thought about it and how I handled it. And, going to my grandmother's house, my cousins were always there. Male cousin who's a year older than me, and my female cousin who's 2 years younger than me. And during Christmas time, I would see them. And later on, whenever I was closer to 5, I was staying with my grandma, and we went to my mother's mother, my great grandmother on my mother's side, her house for Christmas, and my cousins were there, and they have a really big family. My great grandmother on my mother's side had, I like 9, 10 kids. So my grandmother has a lot of brothers and sisters. There was a lot of cousins and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And I played with my little cousin, Lindsay is her name, and I loved her so much. And I wanted her to stay the night with me, and so she got to stay the night with me at my grandmother's house. And I remember being so excited about that. And then we stayed up pretty late, and I started getting tired, and I just wanted to sleep, and she was still going. She was like, woo, party. Still going. I remember I went and told my grandmother, I was like, you gotta do something, I can't sleep. And she went and removed Lindsay and made her go to another room, and it made Lindsay so mad at me. I felt so bad about that. That's the way it is. I remember another time that Lindsay got to visit at my mother's house, in the house that my stepfather built, and we went upstairs and we would play cheerleader. And I remember I wanted to play a card game and she didn't want to, but my cousin Aaron, her big brother, did, and I started playing with that, and she got mad at me for that. And it just became a theme with my cousins where I do want to play something that's a little bit older, because he's closer to my age and she's a little bit younger, and she's kind of a party girl. But yeah, I would want to play games with Erin, and she would always get mad, and it's not always easy. But yeah, and I don't know. With my grandfather, it was hard. As a child, I really did. For the longest time, I carried this burden that you made your grandfather die because you wanted soup. And it was really hard and difficult to carry that. And I thought that my grandmother felt that way about me. I was, pretty certain of it. She treated my cousins way better than she treated me. And I don't know what that has to do with. She's always treated my mother's sister better than my mother, so that it just could be that. She always wanted a boy, but she had 2 girls, and she was like, I'm not going to try anymore. I don't want that many kids. She was the oldest. She was one of the oldest in her family, so typically the oldest don't want as many kids. She had to raise her brothers and sisters, and so she wanted to have her own life now. And my aunt was the oldest, and they always seemed to love her more, and she had a son, and they loved my cousin Aaron, and it is what it is. And yeah, it's not easy. It was a difficult beginning, I haven't even started kindergarten yet, and I've already had a lot of traumas and a lot of things to process. This was my beginning, and my beginning did have a very traumatic death in it. My grandfather killing himself after beating me was definitely one of the hardest things that I've ever had to live through and process. I know that I smile as I tell this story, but I really have done a lot of healing work with this, and I am actually so happy that I get to tell this story and I get to get it out. It feels like once I get it out, then I can really release it and let it go. Like, I feel like I can't release it and let it go until it's heard by someone else. That way it can help someone somehow, in some way. Because if it can do that, then it was all worth it. And maybe it's me. Maybe it's me that it helps. And telling my story does help. So I'm so happy that I get to tell my story. And I thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your love and your support. So there you have it. Some more fun trauma. So I hope that you enjoy hearing the story as much as I enjoy telling it. So thank you, and have a nice day.